Welcome to our first digital presentation of the 2020-2021 season. It's bittersweet for me to greet you this way. Under normal circumstances, we'd be at Jordan Hall and I would be speaking with you all in person. While we're certainly grieving the loss of this experience, we're finding new and interesting ways to bring music to you, developing new skills and experiences almost daily. We've worked hard to curate this program, featuring pieces by Irving Fine, Arnold Schoenberg, and a new commission by close friend T.J. Anderson. During this broadcast, you'll hear interviews with our music director David Hoose, our chamber series director Allison Voth, and composer T.J. Anderson. We have a lot to learn, but learning, growing, and bringing music to you make us hopeful about the future, and that's exactly what music does best.
You do our rights much wrong in seeking to prolong these outward pleasures. No to end us to
This is such an interesting project, one that involves 9 composers, brand new compositions written for, as it turns out, around 35 solo singers in the Cantata Singers. It's a group of people that it's a group of people in which some do not ordinarily sing solos, but everybody's going to be doing that. And it's kind of a crazy idea, one that feels somewhat metaphoric for the time we are in, one of isolation. But I'm wondering, what possessed you to think of this?
My sister had inspired me with a project that was going on in Vancouver early in the spring when artists were really immediately suffering and losing all sorts of freelance work. Immediately, a group called the Little Chamber Music set up a commission. It was called an isolation commission, and each artist, musician, was sponsored by an individual and was given $200 to create a 4-minute video of themselves creating their music. And it was composers, it was pianists, all sorts of instrumentalists, jazz performers, across the board, a very wide selection of musicians. And I thought, I wonder if it led me to think of, okay, I know what I'd like to do maybe at the university, but what about cantata singers? Maybe if we are in a position where I can't even perform with one singer, we know with aerosols, they can't perform together. And it was a real crisis. So how are we going to keep them nurtured? How are we going to keep them going? And keep them within the organization? And I thought, well, maybe we can do this as a chamber. The director of the chamber program, I was used to trying to think outside the box and creating special projects for singers who were interested. But what about a bigger project for not the singers who auditioned, but for everybody? Which, as you said, was a little bit of a crazy idea. If you think of it, there's not a culture in the world that doesn't have music. The most primitive culture always has music, and it's always, if nothing else, it's singing. Always, every culture has singing, and we sing to our children. We sing in religious situations. We sing for courage. Men sing together when they're going to war. Singing feeds our souls.
Rush hour and this town got me out here doing an urban dance. City style, I sprint from space to place. It's the rhythm of my breath. It's the rhythm of my feet. Up tempo pop and fizz this life. This move on energy. This urgency, the suddenness that came so fast, it's got me to wearing a mask, thinking about where I place my hands that just want an even shake at the busy intersection, looking for a human connection.
Every day she waddles to the bodega, pulling her cart with a squeaky wheel, looking up through her thick glasses to utter a quick perfunctory good morning. Her
Yesterday an ambulance came and spewed out medics who pumped her lungs with air. I didn't know her beyond our facile greetings. Today I watch the flowers fade, then turn to pale straw.
Bright greetings to you, sir, on this day of blustery news reports, of shifting markets and incomes, of impending catastrophes and buyouts, of cruisers put to the curb, and masses in the street, and the conflagration of fires, of cures auctioned, and computers accelerating, of masks and evacuated houses dancing in mold, of the cyclical turn of fortune's wheel.
Breath yields to bone, breath yields to bone, the body is not the home. Breath yields to bone, breath yields to bone, the body is not the home. The virus sweeps its way through us. It nestles in our communities in many ways. We witness this fearfully and crouch down like animals, preparing for a storm. Breath yields to bone, breath yields to bone. The body is not the home. What do we look into each other's eyes and realize that the measure of peace is the witness we share? Breath yields to bone. Breath yields to bone. The body is not the home. It's a container preparing to hatch this new kind of love.
It's great to have both TJ and TJ with us this evening to talk about these new songs that TJ Jr. has composed and that for which TJ the third has written the poems. I wonder, our composer, I wonder if you might tell us just a little bit about your relationship with your son, other than the fact that he is your son. And that is, have you set his poems on other occasions?
Oh, yes. I've said a number of his poems, and I find it very rewarding because he thinks like I do. So I just enjoy his text. Excuse me. I enjoy his text very much, really, his poetry very much. There's a sense of rhythm about him, and there's also a sense of profoundness that goes with his words that I find very rewarding.
When we asked you to, if you would participate in this project, you very quickly, we were happy, agreed, and also said right away that your son had poems, you wanted to use his texts. And I wonder, TJ, the poet, I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about the origins of these poems.
Well, I guess when my dad was asking me about, we were talking about the virus and so forth, I felt this urgency to write about it, so I had to sit with it for a couple of months. And I began to think about how the virus has affected different kinds of people, different kinds of populations, right? People of color, the elderly, et cetera, and then the lack of response or the inadequate response of our government, and I think about I was thinking about the tremendous loss of life and illness and so forth, but also the social distancing, how our relationships and connections to other people is very much different, as we are here sitting in this format. So, my dad kind of outlined what he wanted in the poetry, not in terms of subject matter, but in terms of sound, thinking about vowels and certain rhythms and so forth. And so and he was telling me the various singers that would be singing it, the alto and baritone and so forth, and kind of the tonal qualities that I should try to evoke in the poem. And then they just came out pretty quickly, actually.
I think of your music as the music that I know, which is a fair amount, as having a very strong harmonic sense.
Mhm.
And so we strip that away.
Right.
And now what do you do?
Well, you have to, first you have to go to the text. You have to put great emphasis on the text and its meaning. Then you have to create a vocal line that goes with that. And one thing TJ and I discussed is that this piece is a metaphor for the pandemic itself. So I have no objections to your changing notes or rhythms or anything else. In other words, it can be victimized by the virus, as far as I'm concerned, that it's a metaphor.
Out of control. I mean,
yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it's beyond us, all. So far, it's beyond us all. So I think that TJ and I both think very much in this direction. So.
Mm-hmm. I think that idea of being stripped away is really interesting, because that's how it's been for all of us we've been stripped away by various means, and I think the kind of, the paring down or the dispersal of those kind of harmonics speaks to, where we are as a culture and as a society in terms of dealing with this virus, and metaphorically, of course.
Yeah. That's the genius of Allison, to come up with a way to keep composers busy and singers at the same time. I thought that was fantastic. I mean, it's just beyond my imagination how you could come up with something like this. And I think the rewards is that we do different things now, but we still do the same process that we do all the time, composer and singer. So that it keeps us busy. So I really appreciate your idea for this commission. Thank you.
Well, Allison, you said, and both of you said, well, the voices have to go down, and that you favored the lower voices, but the song for tenor does end on a high B flat.
Well, that's true. We do have a high male voice. That's true.
Oh, you can't avoid that note if you're writing for tenor. I mean, you got to have a high B flat.
That's right, somewhere. I'm wondering if there are poems or compositions that are coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement or any other political or humanitarian thoughts of our day that should be somehow absorbing all of us.
For me, I always think that, at least my opinion as an artist, I think that somehow as an artist, my responsibility is to engage in some sort of resistance, right? And my dad always says the responsibility of the artist is to document the culture. And I think that's really important too, to be a testimony, to say, we're here, still here, and kind of bearing witness. And I tell my students there are several ways to protest. One can be out in the streets, one can be writing letters, or one can be, making art, right? And I think that is just as valuable. And I think one of the things that's I see happening now with Black Lives Matter and COVID and a whole bunch of other things that are happening is you have this amazing, democratization of poetry, where you have a lot of people are returning back to art, returning back to poetry. And they're experimenting with various forms. They're experimenting with various ways to use language. They're reclaiming the vernacular. There are poets whose first language might be Spanish, but they're writing in both Spanish and English, blending things in the text and so forth. So the thing about art, it gives us this opportunity to express ourselves as individuals, but as we're expressing ourselves as individuals, we're also expressing the aspirations of the collective, right? Of community, right? And I think that that's one of the things that continues, and there's a long history with that. My dad mentions Haydn and Phil Levine, there's, M.B. Tolson, there's, go back to Phyllis Wheatley, there's a whole bunch of people who have used poetry as an act of resistance, as a way of testimony, as a way of connecting community, as a way of inspiration, as a way of envisioning a future, right? Because it's a choice whether you buy into systemic racism, right? Exploitation, and you allow it to yourself to simply be passive and accept that, or whether you use your art as a catalyst for change, as a catalyst for resistance, right? And that can initiate call and response, right, from other artists. You know, an artist puts out a poem, another artist responds with a song or a dance. That's call and response. And that keeps, and everyone experiences music and art differently, right? But that keeps the conversation going. And it's a verb, right? It's not a noun. It's not stuck there. It's always in the process of change and building up momentum, right? And that's, I think as a species, that's one of the things that makes us great, right? The ability to make art and to share art. That's one of our gifts.
I got the piece, and my first thought was relief. It's 1 page long. So that's one thing that was very positive. I'm like, okay, short and sweet. Let me take a good look at it and see what's in there. And then that's when I noticed that although it was 1 page long, there was a lot going on in there.
Similar to what Andrea was saying, it was, just, it's 1 page. How much can there possibly be? And then you actually look at the music and you read through the poetry, and you realize this is a significant piece of work, and it's an interesting piece of work. Moreover, and during my coachings with both of you, I thought I got so much out of those coachings, and I was able to sort of think much more about the piece when I was coaching with both of you, and I really appreciated that. And being able to live with the piece was a real treat, because I got to see where the decision process comes in.
The first thing I did was read the poem, and I was immediately gripped by it. I think it's hard not to be sad at the end of it. I felt such immediate connection with the poem on reading it, and I found it a lot harder to keep that story when I was actually having to sing the logistics of singing the music. So that was a hard thing for me to work on, I guess, was to still tell the story.
First of all, I was extremely happy to be involved in the project. I'm personally very passionate about doing new music of all sorts, and so the opportunity to premiere a piece was extremely exciting. I'm usually practicing my music without accompaniment, but with the expectation that eventually it will be accompanied. Right. So it was kind of, it was definitely challenging to do it that way. But overall, it was a very interesting experience.
After all that was worked on and suggested, you really, each of you, took your songs and you made them your own, and you made your own decisions, and you went beyond what we had talked about with the text. And it was just wonderful to hear and see. And that takes great courage and creativity. And that was your artistry that really just rose to the surface. And it's just wonderful.